Okie dokie. Well, today we are talking to Alicia Michelle, and I'm so excited to get to chat with her about emotional health and how that comes into play with creativity. And thank you for being here, Alicia.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on today.
You're so welcome. I am so excited to chat with you. I hope you're excited.
Yeah,
I am very excited to read your book that is coming out.
thanks. Yeah, yeah.
Do you want to go ahead and give us kind of a little intro of who you are and
Mhm.
what you do?
Sure. So I'm Alicia Michelle. I am a podcaster, fellow podcaster here at the Christian Mindset Coach podcast, and an author. My first book is coming out November 12th. It's called Emotional Confidence: Three Simple Steps to Manage Emotions with Science and Scripture. And I also am a coach. I am an ICF certified mindset coach for women, mainly Christian women. And because I have a training also in neuroscience, I use the science of how our bodies work, specifically the brain, to help us figure out why do we get stuck in these certain patterns, especially around
Mhm.
not feeling enough or not feeling worthy, when we can know truth. I know I'm supposed to believe this, or if we're a faith believer, like I know this is what God says about me, but why can't I get to that? So I like helping women figure out what's really going on underneath there, and then use some brain science tools to help them move out of that and find healing and have a different
Yeah,
response.
it's so cool.
Yeah.
I know we chatted like a little bit about how you do that, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Would you want to share about your book first, though?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. So the book is specifically talking about how to learn how to manage what we're feeling in a way that we're not running from it, we're not hiding it, and to do so in a practical way. I think maybe there have been other resources that say, just give it to God, or just release it, or just these kind of vague things. And I have created a method that I've used for years in coaching that has been really helpful to help people know, what am I supposed to do with this feeling? How do I process it? And we add in the faith element too. So how can I partner with God to process this emotion and work through it? So it's not that the emotion is taking over, and it still feels like the emotion is heard, and we can feel like we're making a wise decision with what we're feeling, versus being led by our emotions, or feeling like we have no other choice but just to do what they say, so, or to be hiding from them, because a lot of us just want to run from them, and that's a normal response too. So the book covers that method and other ways to feel confident in the fact that we're all going to have these up and down feelings throughout our days. Life is going to be hard. That's just part of it. But how can we be confident in how we handle them? So yeah,
Mm,
that's what I'm excited about, letting this book help people know how to be confident in what they're feeling and how to respond to it in that way.
yeah, it's so good and so needed.
Thank you.
I know when we chatted previously, like I shared one of the questions we talk about a lot on this podcast is like, what has God created me specifically to do? And
Mm,
so, would you want to share a little bit about how you came into this coaching, how you came into this world of emotional health, and how God
mm.
really showed you what He had for you there?
Yes. Yeah. So I was someone who has always been kind of an emotional person. But I didn't know what to do with that. And I think I was raised in a culture and in a home environment where it was like, just buck it up, it doesn't matter what you're feeling, like you have to do this, so just keep going. And so I became very hardened to my feelings, and
Mm,
yet I still had all these things inside of me that I didn't know what to do with. And all of that culminated in a lot of different areas of my life, but that was a big source of what happened to me in 2017. I had a huge medical crisis that came out of nowhere that completely disrupted my life for 9 months. Nearly died from what happened. And they had no explanation for what was happening in my body and what had happened in my body, except that it was a lot of high stress, and I was not sleeping, and all of these things were happening. But as I began peeling back the layers of what needed to change in my life, because I obviously couldn't keep going on the way I was recognizing that a lot of what I was going through and had experienced was based on the fact that I had all this stuff inside of me. I knew how to be the good girl. I knew how to follow the rules. I knew how to say the right things and achieve and do all that stuff. But there was so much underneath that that had never been dealt with. So I began figuring out what is keeping me from addressing that, or why can't I believe this? And that's when the neuroscience part really began to develop and learning more about that. And I saw those two sides, like, okay, we can, in our subconscious mind, have patterns that have been developed there, and we have to address those while we can still logically know a different truth. And that was what was happening for me. And so as I began digging into that and working through that, it unveiled a lot of stuff that was in there that I needed to start working with. And I'd been working with women for years before that online, but this was, as I went through that journey myself, I recognized there were so many other people who also knew the right things to say, but weren't acting from that, who weren't living from that, and had all this stuff just kind of being built inside of them and didn't know what to do. Like, so I just like, this is something that I want to help other people do in coaching. And so we kind of switched everything that I was doing in coaching to focus more on that. And it's been awesome. It's just awesome to see people get freedom in that. Like we said, not that we're never going to have challenging emotions, but just to
Yeah.
know when it comes, I can handle this. I really, really can. And it's not terrifying. And in fact, we have someone, Jesus, who wants to help us in that process. He's not there to condemn us for having those feelings. It's part of being human. And we can grow closer to him as part of that whole process. So it's been great. It's been a really amazing journey.
That's so beautiful. I love that so much. I wish I would have met you 10 years ago.
Oh, yeah. Yes. I wish I would have met me 10 years ago, the me I am now who knows some of these things. But as you know, we go through life and God teaches us these things, and then we're like, man, right?
Yeah. You're like, man, is that easy or is that simple? How,
Oh
come
my
on.
gosh. Yes.
But
Yeah.
I think it brings up an interesting topic that in our society today, we do not, well, I should rephrase that. In our society, when I was growing up, we did, which I'm 32. So in the 90s, early 2000s, we did not have a lot of conversations about how I felt. There were no
Mm-mm.
tools given
No.
to me on how to deal with how I felt, right? And
Right.
a lot of
Yeah.
times it was like, stop crying,
Yes.
go to your room. We don't want to hear that. We don't want to be
Yes.
around you, you know? And so I've noticed like one thing about me is like I've been a professional nanny. And so helping other
Mm.
people raise their children, you see a lot of different parenting styles. You see
Yeah,
a lot of different
definitely.
things. And
Yeah.
one thing that I've been thinking about lately is like, how are we teaching these kids to, handle these emotions? And so
Mm.
I don't know, maybe like it's interesting because actually in my small group last night we talked about it's harder to mend a broken man than it is to
Mm.
build a boy into that man. And
Oh,
it's kind of like what you're
absolutely.
doing,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. It's like, I remember several years ago, my kids were in karate, and I remember the sensei, I think it's who it was, he came to us one day and he was talking about how building kids was like growing a tree, and that if the earlier you got to the sapling and you were able to keep it growing upright, the easier it was for it to blossom into this full tree. But if the tree started to grow to the side here and then you kept waiting, it was like eventually you had to push harder to get the tree to go back straight, but it took a lot more effort. So that the earlier we could begin working on some of the things that we were working on, it would make it a lot easier. And it's kind of the same concept that it takes a lot more effort to change these things than if we know them from the beginning.
Mm, yeah. Wow, that makes sense. There's a
Yeah.
lot of like analogies in the Bible to trees and plants growing, and
Yeah.
it is kind of like that's a fruit you're getting or you've grown all these years. You're
Mm.
going to chop a lot of things down to get rid of, you know?
Yeah. But at the same time, there's always hope. I mean, my story is a perfect example of that. And even your story, like you're saying, you grew up not knowing how to deal with this either. That there's always that place where we can say, this is not how I want to live anymore. This is
Mhm.
not serving me anymore. I don't want to live like this. So I need to do something different. And yeah, of course, if we could all start off perfectly modeled and live, the way we're supposed to, it would be a lot easier. But Thank goodness, hallelujah, that God is a God of saving grace who meets us where we're at and shapes us where we're at and molds us into what we need to become, no matter what's going on. And that's just, I think, the most beautiful thing of all, because we can never be too far or too messed up. He's always there to correct us and send us in the right direction.
Yeah. I have this like little piece of art that says broken crayon, still color.
Oh,
And
yes.
I
Yeah.
love that. I love it.
Yeah. So
Um,
true.
well, hey, this kind of speaking of art, that's what we
Hmm.
do here on the Creative Christian.
Yeah.
So I wanted to kind of get a professional's thoughts on
Okay.
this subject of emotional health when it comes to creativity. So personally, I think when you are creating art, you're replicating a part of yourself, right?
Mm,
Like you
true.
can't create something you don't have. And
Yeah.
so I would think like if we aren't addressing our emotional health as artists, it's super important because what we create is going to be a reflection of that.
Mm. Yeah. That makes
So
sense.
yeah, I think when you look at like the world, we have a lot of unhealthy examples of
Mm,
art that, it's great to create art just because you want to create it, right? Like I'm sure that's very therapeutic and very helpful for emotions,
yeah,
right?
definitely. Yes.
But at some point, I think we have to kind of take responsibility in the same
Mm,
vein of like, hey, what I'm putting out there in the world, it is like amplifying, it's multiplying. Like it's like a
mm,
seed. It's a seed that is getting into other people's hearts and their minds. And so
that's
just
true.
kind of wanted to throw that idea out there and see
Mm,
what your thoughts were about the importance of
mm.
our emotional health when we're creating art.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective that we can make art no matter where we're at emotionally, but is it art that is helping others? Because if what we're creating is coming out of our own heart and what we're feeling and experiencing, then is it productive or helpful for it to be something if we're creating from a heart that's got a lot of stuff going on, a lot of baggage?
Yeah.
But creativity can help move that baggage out.
Mm,
It can be a way to express things that maybe you can't verbally, um, or you're not even realizing that you have emotionally that you're
yeah.
working through. So I think there's a give and take there. But if you're talking about art for the sense of putting it out there to influence others versus just art by yourself, nobody's ever going to see it, you know, then maybe that's a different perspective. But yeah, if you're trying to influence people with art, then absolutely you need to be coming from a place where you're giving art from a healthy emotional sense. So,
Yeah. Yeah. You made me think of earlier today I met a producer in a recording studio and I was like, play me the music that you are just like it's what's got you fired up and passionate right now because he played a lot of other people's stuff. Well, he
yeah,
pulls up his record and it's like called Midlife Crisis. It
gosh.
it was actually very good, okay? Very good, but I was like so shocked. And like the song he played was called Liquid Sugar Baby and it was like shake that, and I was like, "What?" I did not expect it. And then 3 seconds later, he's playing this Christmas album that this guy in
Mm,
ministry that I went there to meet has been working on, and I'm like crying, because
wow.
it was so gorgeous and so beautiful. And so I think it's like, man, God has given us the ability to create, and it's really wild what we can do with it.
Well, and that, the fact that we can have such diverse emotions at the same time. We can hold both of
Mhm.
those crazy, wild sides of emotions together. And that is also super encouraging with emotions, I think, is that it's not that we're always trying to switch to one. Like there's a big pressure, I feel, which is something that I'm passionate about changing, a big pressure in the church to always be joyful. Like joy is the number one thing that we should have. Well, joy is a fruit of the spirit. So we don't need to try harder to accept and have joy. Joy is a gift from God, and we can tap into that. Yes, absolutely. At the same
Yeah.
time, sometimes the path to getting to joy requires that we walk in that valley of pain to get there.
Mm.
So there's a lot of people who are trying to just jump to that joy cloud and don't understand why they're missing that. When in reality, if you could peel back and see what are the emotions behind it, how can you acknowledge those and see what's really there? and heal from those. And then it's a lot easier for the fruits to flow that we really are be more pleasurable. And that, there is those connection moments. There are gifts of the other sides of emotions that aren't always just happy. Like, we're not made to just be like, yay, happy all the time. I think our Western culture really emphasizes that. So yeah.
Yeah. That's good. That is a good question. How do you hold both of those
Mm.
well? Like, how do you walk through extreme grief and not hate everyone in your life? Like, how do you,
Mm.
how do you handle those extreme emotions?
I think it starts with saying that it's plausible why both are there, not because you could be mad at yourself for having joy. If you've ever walked through that valley of deep grief, you feel like, how could I even be happy that it's a beautiful day outside? This is this horrible thing happening in my life. Um, I think understanding that we are a mix all the time of different feelings is where we can start, and knowing that it's okay to feel both, that there's no shame in holding
Mhm.
both. And in terms of joy, like, again, the joy that we're talking about isn't just happiness, it's a contentment, almost like a place to rest. I think of joy as a place to rest with God, not like a feeling of I'm so happy. Um, it's a safe place that's a solid anchor when hard things are happening. So if you think of it like that, then it's a steady emotion versus a up and down happy feeling. So it is a little bit easier to understand how it can exist in that kind of a place. It's kind of like love. We don't always necessarily feel loving to other people, but when we have, it's not about working harder to love people. It's about asking God for help in understanding how to let his spirit work through us more so that we can love people. So I don't know if
Yes.
that answers your question, but I don't know, there's some
It
thoughts I have.
it does. And that last part I'm glad you said, because there is someone in my life I'm doing that with now. And it's a great reminder that I don't have to let me work so hard, let me like grin and bear it,
Yeah,
let me white knuckle it until I really care about this person,
it
like
is. Yeah.
God doesn't want me to be fake, but you know,
Yes.
he will also be strong for me when I'm weak. And that's good.
Right. I was going to say, our pastor was recently talking about this, and he was like, if we were supposed to feel loving towards every time we love, then why does God call us to love our enemies? Because we certainly
Mm,
aren't going to feel good about
yeah.
loving our enemies, but we're still called to do it. It's that choice and him working through us. It's the obedience and submission to let him do that through us versus feeling that love. I don't know, just the idea of that loving our enemies, that really helped me to understand the difference, that it's just
Yeah.
not, yeah.
I had a friend who we were talking about that verse, and he said, because I think I asked him like, what is God teaching you in this season? And he
Mhm.
said that it's okay to have enemies because the
Mm.
Bible says love your enemies. And why would God tell me that if I weren't supposed to have any? And I was
Yeah,
like, well, we don't talk about that in church.
right. There's a right and a wrong, and there's bad and
Mm,
good. There's boundaries.
yeah.
Yeah, it's healthy. It's healthy to, I wouldn't say so far as it's healthy to have enemies, like we should look to have enemies as a part of health,
Like,
but
well, I don't
it's
have any. Let's go out there.
understandable. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's understandable, and I just firmly believe that the first part of the method that I teach in the book, and of a lot of emotional healing, is really acknowledging why it's there and seeing, why does it make sense that I'm considering this person an enemy? Let's be real about
Mm,
that. Let's not try to fake joy or fake love this person. God wants us to be honest about that, and his compassion is for us in that frustration. So how
yeah.
can we lean into that as part of getting to where we need to go?
That's good. Yeah. It makes me think that we should do a little of that application, real life application. So I know you work with people one on one in coaching. Let's say I came to you for coaching and I am just really struggling. And we'll kind of like walk through that. So I did think of a scenario. It's real. It's real life. So
Okay.
I think for me in relationships, I have struggled a lot with like feeling like someone's going to abandon me
Mm,
and then like
mhm.
self imploding the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so thankfully, I don't think I'm currently doing this any longer.
Okay.
But, surprise, surprise, it could always
Mm,
you never know.
sure. Yeah.
So yeah, how would we kind of like work through that?
Yeah. So again, we would start with understanding why you're doing that and knowing that your brain is very smart and it's trying to keep you from being hurt again. And that's
Mm,
why that's happening. And so it's first noticing when the pattern begins. Like you said, you've seen that it's not actively happening right now, but just noticing like what are some signs that I'm starting to do that, and seeing it and not instantly shutting it down. But I think I would help you explore like, why is it plausible that this is happening? And oh, here's that voice again, or here's what I'm trying to do again. And recognizing, I am responding in a way that makes sense, but I also have a mind. And as a Christian, I have the mind of Christ to decide, do I want to keep responding like this? I can choose to respond differently.
yeah.
And so we could work on how we would walk you through seeing that in a loving way, literally bringing that idea to the cross as if it's a wounded child, somebody who's been wounded like that. There's a wound there that God can heal. And so it's not like we want to just say, whatever, you're going to be fine, just push through it. That needs to be healed. So working
Yeah.
through that and then figuring out what are some safe ways to begin to kind of venture into that area and to get a different response and to see how that feels. But to understand like this is an area that's it's been biologically set up from some past issues. And so if it comes up, we're not to be surprised by it, but it's just part of it. And I know how I can work through it.
Yeah. And even after I told you that, I feel like the Lord's like, "Oh, you think you don't struggle with that anymore?"
He's so funny like that. You're like,
Because
no.
it can be big things like, okay, and before it was like, losing a relationship that was so important to me that
Mm,
caused me to be like, okay, I have to confront this and I have to deal with this and I have to understand why I do this, and
right.
really seeking the Lord in it, right? And so like I'm not currently doing that big action, but what I feel like the Lord was just showing me is like there's little ways, like if someone doesn't text you back and you like, well, I'm not going to talk to them now because,
Yeah.
or even, gosh, well, I don't want to bother them and I don't want them to, you know be mad
Yes.
at me
Avoiding
because I,
conflict potentially. Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, or
Yeah.
like, there's all these new people and I don't know any of them. And so I just kind of
Mm,
stay to myself, even though I'm a huge
mm,
extrovert and like the life of the
yeah.
party is how people describe me. But it's like that behavior doesn't make sense to me. So I think it's
Mm.
like an onion how we, over the years, can like unpack these things.
Yeah, we're so smart. Our brain is so smart in trying to keep us from being hurt in all those big ways, but also little ways, like you said, just not rocking the boat, keeping things constant. Because if I don't respond and tell them that they made me mad that they did that, then guess what? There's no tension. I don't have to worry about them leaving me potentially. There's all these things that we do. And if we can begin to notice our behavior and not shut it down, not judge it, but just say, that's interesting. That's really interesting.
Mm,
Is that is that how I wanna continue to be? And if it's not, then God, what can I do differently to and should I respond differently? But it's again, it starts with noticing it. And so you're on that road if you're noticing those little things happening. And I think like for me, when I've had little things like that in my life, mine revolves usually around workaholism, like just, pushing myself too hard. It's like I hear that voice telling me, you need to do this, or, and it's like, okay, here you are again. I hear that voice in a new way, a different way that maybe, she didn't show up before, but it's still that same side of me that it's like, okay, I see it. Hello. It's safe. It's safe to stop working. It's safe to stop doing, I have to kind of walk through all the things, but it gets
yeah.
easier when you can start to notice the little voice, how it shows up different ways.
Yeah, man, those lives can be deep. And so I
Mm.
know you, it's limiting beliefs, right?
Mhm.
That is the technical term. So I know that when you work with someone, you would kind of uncover those limiting beliefs like we just talked about and then replace it with like what's the word? I am statements, or I can't think
Yeah,
of.
it's a little more than maybe limiting beliefs. It depends on I mean, from like the neurological standpoint, it's like, are there these subconscious soundtracks that are
Mm,
literally running the show that we aren't logically thinking about? But like you're saying, to protect yourself from being hurt again, you find yourself responding in certain ways. So in neuroscience, we're looking always, if we have a certain behavior, we walk it all the way back to the thought. So what is the thought that caused the emotion, or the belief that created the decision, that created the action and the result? So we're always backing it up. So if the result is I find myself avoiding talking to this person or not rocking the boat, then it goes back to, well, what was the thought underneath that? So we begin to see patterns of, what is that thought pattern? Where did it come from? Why does it make sense it's there? What does it need in order to be released? That's really what
mm,
I like to focus on. What does it need to get healing? Because it's really easy to just tell ourselves, I'm not going to be fine. I have to step out there, whatever we're going to say. But that subconscious mind needs to be able to get that healing and understand it really is safe to do that. So, what does it need to know? What does it
mm.
need to know that it doesn't already know? And that kind of work is, more than just like one session. That's actually what I do in the mindset makeover and in one-on-one coaching. But figuring that out, and we use a tool called brain priming to change that thought pattern and figure out, what are those things. We're recognizing it, but we're saying, but it's safe to believe this now, and I'm thankful that this is the truth that I'm standing on. And so it's a process that takes 63 to 67 days to rewire that subconscious thought that's in your brain, so that when the thought trigger comes again, it has almost like a different bridge it's taking. Like, it's if it's always gone this way, we're teaching it, okay, we're going to dismantle these neurons that are making it go this way, and we're going to build this bridge over here. So that's the great thing about our brain, is it's continually being renewed. We literally don't have the same brain as we did 6 months ago, because there's new neurons continually being built, about 1,500 a day of new neurons that we get. So we have the ability to change those thought patterns. God wants us to change those thought patterns, and our bodies are saying it's possible. So yeah, that's the kind of work that I would do to help unwire some of that, so that it's not just an affirmation where we're just making ourselves believe it. We have to know, what do we need to be able to know or to have to heal in that area to move forward. Does that make sense?
So much. And I
Yeah.
think it's so important, getting to the root of a
Yes.
matter, because if
Yes.
you don't, it's kind of like our analogy earlier, like of a tree or any kind of
Right.
fruit producing plant. If you don't get the root out, it's just going to keep growing. And
Yes.
so
And so
that's, yeah,
we
that's
talk
great.
about those things of, the three questions that our brain has answered by the time we're around anywhere from ages 9 to 13. Am I worthy? Am I enough? And am I loved? However, our
Mhm.
brain has answered that. Usually we're not doing that in a logical way. It's how have our life experiences helped us answer that. For me, for example, I was worthy and enough when I worked hard, or when I appeared perfect, or when I had all the right accolades, good grades, achieving whatever. That was when I was worthy. And so, even though logically I knew something different, that was what was modeled and reinforced. So that is what the subconscious mind does. It's not a logical side of our brain. It's a pattern creator. And so
Mm.
when we can notice that and change that, it's just like everything changes. So like when we do that work, I'm always encouraging clients, let's keep peeling it back. It's not just this one thought. It's, what is that root concept? Because when you pull out the root, like you said, you're not just clipping off the leaves of the weed. You're actually getting to all of it. And so much clarity happens when you can do that work.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
So I know we are wrapping it up here, but
Yeah.
last question for you.
Sure.
And I know it's going to be one of those annoying questions, because how do you give just one thing? But if you can give one last important thing,
Mm.
like a key takeaway for Christians on emotional health, what would it be?
I would say that God is not your enemy in
Mm,
this. God is your partner. God sees you in the pain that you're feeling. And if we can choose to not be afraid of what we're experiencing, but to know that there's a God who wants to help us acknowledge it and show us his compassion. He wants to help us discern right from, truth from lies in it. and have his clarity in that. And then he wants to help us make a good decision with it. And he gives us courage to make that good decision, that he's with us in every stage of processing an emotion. And if we've always run from our emotions, it's not too late. Like, you can start today, right now, just beginning to work through this process with God. And he's there. He wants to help us. I really, truly feel like a lot of people want to see God in the everyday. They talk about that all the time. This is an amazing way to see God show up in your life all the
Mm.
time if you learn how to partner with him to manage your emotions. So this is something to dig into and to stop being afraid of. We can do this.
Yeah, that's so good. Well,
Yeah,
Alicia, thank you so much for helping us
sure.
grow today.
Thank
Um,
you.
where can people find all your information?
Oh, thank you. Yes. So you can find out all the information about me at aliciamichelle.com, and it's ALICIA and then MICHELLE.com. You'll find out info about the podcast there, which is the Christian Mindset Coach, the book, Emotional Confidence. We also have all kinds of freebies and other things on there, free trainings and stuff that you can get. So, yeah, I would love to connect with you. Instagram is another way. I'm at Alicia Michelle Coach there. And I would love to continue. If there's anything that we talked about today, you're like, you know what, I kind of really relate to what that was, or I would like to talk more about that, reach out to me on Instagram. Send me a DM. I'd love to connect.
Sounds good. Well, thank
Yeah.
you, Alicia.
Thank you.